Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So, Robert, just to give you a heads up, we have been going since 9 a.m. in our faculty retreat.
I get to end your day. Wow.
Yes. So you've got the dedicated few here that are, yes,
The
yes,
people who are serious.
yes. Okay, so how do you want to start? We have been talking to a few people. We do have other questions, I think, that might pop up from the discussion as we talk, but do you want to start with any thoughts and then whatever questions you received in the email?
Yeah, I've just got a few kind of opening remarks to make here, and then we can just jump right into it. I'm gonna have some slides here, not terribly many of them, but let me get this going, and y'all tell me if this should be visible to you.
Yeah, we
Okay, so first of all, I want to say thanks, and I'm grateful for your attention and for persevering throughout a really long day. I mean, having a meeting. Like, is it being called a retreat by any chance?
yes.
Like what you're engaged in right now? Yeah, it's not really a retreat, right? It's like unless this is some tropical island somewhere, it's not really a retreat. But anyway, thanks for being here. Appreciate your what you're doing there at University of Houston downtown, and I'm grateful to Judith and thank you to her and her team for having me come in and do this today. Really had a great time back in August visiting with you all, some of you all, and doing a workshop on active learning classrooms and talking about alternative grading back in those days. And I know you've been busy thinking about this stuff, so I want to jump right into it. But first of all, a couple of things here. I'm really excited to, before we get started, I want to make sure I let you know about this really exciting opportunity that is coming up real soon. It's a reading group of the Grading for Growth book. As y'all probably know, I wrote this book with my colleague David Clark called Grading for Growth, and that's kind of what my part of what my visit back in August was about. If you haven't read the book, this is a really good time to jump in. We're going to be partnering with Perusall. Perusall is, some of you may know, is a software platform for social annotation. What you do with Perusall is you take it and you upload texts and video content and other sorts of things, and you give it out to students, and the students can then read the text, watch the videos, and comment on it, and create these really rich discussion threads. And it's a really fascinating and fantastic piece of software, web-based software for doing that sort of thing. And what they're focusing on doing now is using this to engage faculty in faculty learning groups by taking books and creating little courses out of them. And we have a 4-week experience coming up, starting off on Monday. So this event today is well timed. This is a reading group, a slow reading group of the Grading for Growth book. It will be uploaded, it currently is uploaded into Perusall. And if you join the group, you will have 4 weeks of full access to the full text of the book. And we'll read, the group will be reading roughly 3 or 4 chapters a week out of the book and annotating it, leaving questions and comments as we go, and having discussion threads as we go. So it's sort of a little asynchronous course. Right now, we've got over 80 people signed up for this group. It's actually quite a big group from all over the place. I would really love to see you there if you have the inclination. It's $15 for the 4-week experience, and you get full access to the book. You get full access to a really diverse and interesting community of people. And David and I will be on every day to kind of do some live Q&A and discussion and driving things along. So it starts Monday, so it's not too late to join in. And if you're interested in doing that, the place to go is perusall.com/engage. And you can sign right up and get onto that list and get in on that. I believe there will be a discount on the actual print book too. If you haven't bought that yet, joining the group will get you a discount on the actual book. So I'm really excited about this. I think this is a cool and innovative way to build a global community of practice around some very important ideas, I feel like, that a lot of people seem to be really, really interested in, and especially to learn from other people. Again, very diverse group, all different kinds of institutions, some who are not in institutions at all, who are just like private citizens who somehow found their way to this book. So I hope to see you there. So with that, what I'd like to do, this is an Ask Me Anything session. And how this works, the way I think it will work is I'm using right now a tool called Mentimeter, and it's a slide presentation tool. But it also allows you to ask questions. And so if you're there in the room, if you're with your phone or your tablet or your laptop, if you go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and enter in that 8-digit code you see there, that 8-digit code will remain at the top of every slide. What it will do is present these slides to you on your on a web browser. And you have the ability to ask questions not only there in the room, which is one way we're going to ask questions, but you can also click on this little text balloon thing here in the lower right, and that will also ask you to or prompt you to add a question, and that will just queue up questions that I can get to really at any point during the during any point during the event today. So you can ask questions. Again, these instructions will be there at the top of the page. Go to menti.com and use that code. So how we're going to ask a question, I don't believe, it doesn't look like there's anybody actually on Zoom. Sometimes I do this and there are like mixed audiences. It looks like everybody's there in the room. If you have a question, you can certainly raise your hand. It looks like you have a couple of microphones there in the room to kind of field those questions. Or as things are proceeding, if you have a question and you don't want to or don't have the inclination to ask it out loud, you can click the text balloon in the lower right to drop that question into into Mentimeter, and I'll get to that a little bit later. And there were also a couple of questions that were asked in advance via the form. And so I'm going to be getting to questions in roughly this order. I'd like to start with whatever questions you may have right off the top there in the room. And if that dies down, I will take a look over at the Mentimeter questions. And if that dies down, eventually I will get to the 2 questions that were submitted in advance. So pick your poison, pick your way of doing things. Everybody's got their own favorite thing. I see somebody already asked a question here. But why don't we start with people who are in the room? And let me ask y'all a question here. Can you see my face right now on your screen, or is it just the slides?
Just the slides.
Okay, I'm going to fix that by stopping the screen share. I've stopped the screen share, but you should still see the slides on your device. Okay, on your browser tab that you opened up. And if not, I'll hit the screen share again, I guess. And okay, so with that, this is an Ask Me Anything session. Okay, so I know you might have some questions about grading and so forth, but you can ask me anything you want. You can ask about flipped learning, you can ask about active learning classrooms, you can ask about my cats, you can ask about what's the weather like in Michigan, or whatever. It's Ask Me Anything. So I'm at your disposal for the next 40-ish minutes, 50 minutes or so.
Okay.
So what would you like to know about?
All right, so we have a mic. In order for Robert to hear us, you'll need to ask the question in the mic. So either you can go to that one right here, or you can raise your hand and I'll bring you one. Who wants to start?
Hi, I'm Lisa. I will confess I haven't finished the book yet, but I came to book club anyway. But I guess my biggest thing that I was wondering if you could talk about is the workload that this creates, this really cool approach, and how I predict some things you might say, but if you could just address creative thoughts about the workload that all cool new pedagogy creates and how we do that without killing ourselves.
Yes, exactly. That's the great question too, and I appreciate that question. So there's actually one of the questions that was submitted in advance is not exactly this, but it's very adjacent to it. And I'm going to start with one answer that I think helps a lot of things. That is, keep things as simple as humanly possible. Let me give you the counterfactual to that and describe like what it was like for me when I first started using alternative grading back 10 years ago now. I got really excited about alternative grading. I'd read Linda Nilsson's specifications grading book. If you haven't read that one, cue that one up next once you're done with Grading for Growth. And I was just very, very excited. And I had a class coming up in like 3 weeks, and I decided to take my syllabus and throw it completely out the window and start over with specifications grading. That class had 63 learning targets in it that I required students to demonstrate knowledge on in 3 different ways with reassessments. It was an endless treadmill of grading. And I thought it was, at the time, I thought I was like a genius because I came up with this idea more or less on my own. But in the end, it was like, it just wasn't, it was way, way, way too complicated. And I just crushed myself with work. And I know y'all at UHD have, you have 3-4 teaching, 4-3 teaching loads and large classes sometimes. So it can really happen. And the way to avoid it, there's several ways to avoid it. First of all, just try to keep the class itself as simple as possible. I think there's a lot to be said for just simply cutting the workload off at the source, right? One thing I would highly, highly encourage everybody to do, and not everybody's in a position to do this, so I get it, but if you can, go through the class that you're thinking about using alternative grading in and just start removing things from it. Ask yourself, like, does this really have to be in this class? Maybe the answer is yes, and so you got to keep it. Maybe the answer is no, like this is a favorite topic of mine, but it doesn't really need to be in the class. You got to at least tag it for removal. Put the class on a diet to begin with, and just get anything that doesn't really have to be there out. And that goes too for assessments as well. We know how academics can be. We just like to pile on more and more and more and more, and to think about reducing the size of something, like taking things out of a class, like did I need to have 3 different forms of assessment required on these learning targets? I mean, it gave me better information, but did it give me like 33% more information than having 2 kinds of assessments? Then the answer is really no. I mean, I could get by with a lot less. It's not doing more with less. It's like doing less but better. Okay, by reducing the size of the course itself and the complexity of the system that you have set up, you'll end up actually making it better, not only simpler, but better. So simplify, simplify, simplify. Otherwise, as you probably surmise, you're gonna get into grading jail and stay there for the whole semester. So reduce the size of the course itself by removing topics, removing assessments, removing things you have students to do. Just because it's helpful for a student to do something in a class doesn't mean that they should do it. You want to look like for the body of assessments and topics that is minimally helpful to students, like not minimally helpful, but the smallest you can have that produces the greatest amount of results. And that's something that's an art form. Not everybody can do it. Again, I get that. Maybe if you're a contingent faculty, for example, you may not have creative control over your courses, but insofar as you can, try to slim things down to begin with. Another thing that's really important in the 4 pillars model that we describe in the book, and even if you haven't read that far, it's a key part of alternative grading is reattempts without penalty. This is where a lot of so a student will try something on an assessment, and the idea is that it's part of a feedback loop. And to close that loop, the students need to be able to get feedback and do another reattempt based on the feedback. And that can look like a lot of different things, but it's always reattempting something. This is where a lot of alternative grading instructors get hung up because there's so many reattempts that it just becomes an avalanche by the end of the semester. Like you just can't deal with it. Importantly, it's reattempts without penalty, but not reattempts without limitations. Okay, if you're giving reattempts without penalty in an alternative grading class, like say for example, you're teaching a sociology class and there's several papers that students have to complete or essays that students have to complete, and you want to give students the ability to revise and resubmit essays that don't meet content standards. That's fine. That's important, and I think really necessary. But they don't have to have like unlimited reattempts in terms of either time or number. You can, for example, say each essay can be revised up to 3 times, period. Or maybe you say, I'm going to be giving you a bunch of essays and you can submit 1 revision per week of an essay or 2 revisions per week of an essay, whatever it that makes sense to you, but not just as many revisions as you want, as often as you want, because then it becomes unpredictable for you as the instructor to grade it all. And you know what's going to happen? I mean, students are going to wait to the end of the semester and dump 1,000 essay revisions on you each. I had this happen. I teach math, but I teach upper level math courses, and there's a lot of writing in those. It's like an essay course. And I finally had to come to the point where students work on these problems or proof problems, and they can revise them, but they only get 2 revisions a week of anything. And it all stops the last week of classes, the Sunday of the last week of classes. So there's limitations built into this. They cannot pile up and procrastinate and wait on things. And they can't just turn around right back around and submit like 5 revisions a week. It keeps it by putting a limitation on things. It kind of places some value on the revision. It's a scarcity type of thing because the revisions are not a free for all. You have to pay attention to them, and I think that's good. And it keeps the grading load manageable for me. I mean, it's definitely not a reduction in work. I don't think there's any universe where alternative grading or even something like ungrading is a straight up reduction in the amount of work that you would do as versus traditional grading. But it does change the equation in terms of the value of your time that you spend on it. And putting some reasonable limitations on things can really, really help. And everybody should do that. So simplify and don't be afraid to put limitations on things would be my 2 biggest ways to kind of keep from ending up in grading jail like I did.
Okay.
If anybody has, I know a lot of people want to know about workload and stuff like that. And it would be okay to have a follow-up question about that. But if hopefully that gives you some stuff to think about. And that's helpful. Ready to take another. I see you've got a question on Mentimeter here too, if there's nothing going on in the crowd.
Hi. Hi, I'm Leena Kumar from Political Science, and I think I submitted a question to you online too, but this is in reference to use of AI in the classroom. And so I'm wondering, how does that figure into, the alternate grading system that you're talking about?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question too. That really made me think. If they may have been like 2 people submitting AI questions, and if you may have AI questions as well. I got to tell you, first of all, I don't have any like really clever answers to the questions about AI. I mean, I'm right there with the rest of y'all trying to figure this out as we go. I can tell you that I got absolutely blindsided by the use of ChatGPT in my classes last semester, and I had real issues with this because I walked into it with no plan. I just figured, like, I'm smart, I'll figure this out. That was not the case. And so I'm trying to take a much more intentional approach right now. Classes for us just started this week. Just had class number 2 today. Class number 3 is going to be an entire class devoted to talking with my students about academic integrity and artificial intelligence use. I can tell you this. One of the chief causes of academic misconduct in higher education is not the presence of artificial intelligence tools. It's the perception by students that the main purpose of a course is to achieve a grade. We have research that tells us this, research that predates AI tools about motivation. And when students perceive, whether it's true or not, whether they just look at the syllabus and perceive that it looks like the reason that we have this class is for me to do stuff so I can get a grade, and it's all extrinsic, students are much, much more likely to cheat than if the perception that they have of the course is that they're there to master learning certain kinds of content and processes. If there's a mastery orientation that's clearly communicated in the course, what the research tells us is that academic integrity could still be an issue in isolated places, but it's not going to be as much of a problem as if it looks like grades are the only reason that we're there. And so I would say, and I really believe this is true, and this is my whole approach this semester, is I'm really trying to lean on my alternative grading structure, especially the revision and reattempt policies, to say, like, there is no value proposition for you in using artificial intelligence to commit any form of academic misconduct. There is nothing there for you that's worth it, because all you got to do is give me your best effort And if it falls short, you'll be told in a kind and supportive way, and you'll be given encouragement and feedback that lets you close that loop and try it again. Using ChatGPT or other AI tools to simply do your work for you is a losing proposition, and for any number of reasons. And so I think that alternative grading setups, because they involve revisions and reattempts and feedback loops, I mean, it's very clearly oriented towards mastery and not simple grade acquisition. Put it in line with what we know about the research on teaching and learning, and especially the psychological research behind motivation. It puts it in line to be less of an issue. I mean, are there going to be students that still do it? Sure. Are we ever going to be able to just straight up prevent the use of AI tools or anything else for academic misconduct? No way. It's here, and we got to deal with it. And I think the way to deal with it appropriately is culturally, honestly. I mean, I want to create a culture in my class where, personal mastery of the content is what the class is about. And it's clearly indicated through the very structures of what's in the syllabus. And I think that alternative grading does this, whereas traditional grading struggles to do this. That's my bet that I'm making, at least, and that's what we're going to talk about with my students on Friday. It's also helpful. You mentioned assessments too, and one thing I found to be very, very helpful for me last semester, and I'm really going to double down on it this semester, is actually using AI as an assessment. So here's what I mean by that. So there are certain kinds of problems that my students solve. I teach a class called Discrete Structures for Computer Science, and it's the math theoretical underpinnings behind computer science. And there are certain problems that are involved. And I just, at one point, took one of the problems I was going to assign my students and loaded it into ChatGPT. And then I loaded it into two other AI tools. It was like Microsoft's and Google's. And it was a counting problem where you're supposed to count the number of ways to do a certain task. And I got 3 different answers. I was like, well, wait a minute, you can't get 3 different answers to the same counting problem. I mean, it's not all math problems have a single right answer, but this one does. Okay. And it turned out that like none of the AI's answers were correct. And you could sit there and point out the errors. So I decided to turn that into an assignment. I said, I took this problem and I loaded it into ChatGPT, Bard, and whatever Microsoft's is called. I can't remember the name of it. Or just Bing Chat is what it's called. And I got these 3 answers. I load those 3 solutions into a Google document. And I said, question, which of these, if any, is correct? They're all different, so they can't all be correct. Okay, if none of them are correct, you got to come up with a correct answer, correct solution, and explain it clearly. If one of these is correct, you got to explain why it's correct and why the other ones aren't. And so this AI auditing kind of assignment, I'm really going to double down on this and give like several of these assignments out this semester. It's like, I put this into ChatGPT. It's a normal problem from your textbook, and it gave me an answer. Is it right? Okay, and you can't check that kind of thing with an AI because by definition, I mean, what would you do? Feed it back into an AI? And so I think the very shortcomings of artificial intelligence tools, first of all, students it was a real eye-opening experience for a lot of my students to see just how wrong an AI can be. And they're not like the oracles at Delphi or that just get it right all the time. And second of all, they thought that was a really interesting exercise because, it kind of impresses upon them that the human still has to be in the loop. I mean, the human brain still trumps all that stuff, and kind of puts AI in its place. And so that's an assignment actually that has revisions and reattempts attached to it as well. Like a lot of students came back and said, well, ChatGPT is right because it has a better large learning model or something like that. No, that's not a good enough. That's not a real explanation. I got to give it to you in math terms. So go back and do this one again. As they just kept doing it, and because it wasn't incentivized, it wasn't optimized towards grade acquisition. They didn't cheat on it. So this is a really challenging problem, and I think that alternative graded classes are in a great position to turn AI into a really useful tool for learning, which I believe it really is. There's no point in trying to ban it or whatever. It's here to stay. So we got to just, trust our students and ask our students to trust us and give them things that, show them that their human brain is better than all that.
Okay, hold on, some follow-up questions.
Thank you for your comments so far. I read the book and it was quite compelling, and especially that I was reading it after Linda Nielsen's specs grading book. It kind of gave it a broader context for me. So I've been trying to do specs grading for the last year and a half or so, and I think it's going okay. But the first time where I encountered some kind of uncertainty was when I was trying to report out some of the results of the specs graded assignments into my assessment report. Because at that point, if a student meets expectations, and those were set as the requirement for a student to pass the course, then essentially anyone who passed the course got 100% on that assignment, if that's how I set it up. And then for assessment purposes, I'm reporting that every student is 100%, which makes it a competency-based grading version versus a regular grading, and that causes some issues. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how you merge the idea of alternative grading in an environment where the majority of the assessment is done using traditional grading versions, and then you have to like merge everything together into an assessment report at the end.
Yeah, great
Thank you.
question. I'm not totally familiar with your assessment report or what that's involved, but I think that there's a general question here about how do you get alternative grading to live inside a traditional system, whether that's a coordinated section of a class where you're the only person teaching so you have like a 20 section class and there's a course coordinator, but your section, you want to do it non-traditionally graded. This is something I would just say, first of all, communication with the person that is on the other end of that assessment report is really, really important. To say, I don't know if it's your unit head or your dean or somebody else, but go to them and say, here's what I am doing, and I want to make this work meaningfully with the rest of the system. Can we talk about how this might go? And maybe they have some ideas for that as well. Maybe they don't even realize, what it is, what specs grading is, or that anybody's paying attention to it or using it. There's different ways to approach it. The situation at Grand Valley that I'm most familiar with, that is maybe most similar to what you're describing, is around the middle of the semester, we have to give out midterm grades, not to every student, but to students who are deemed at risk for whatever reason. And these are supposed to be letter grades. And if you're using specs grading, then you know that it doesn't work that way. I mean, you don't have like a formula like a little mini formula that you can use to, simulate your final formula that will be like the real grade at the end. What I've taken to do, and so what do you do? I mean, do you say like, well, at the middle of the semester, you really haven't accomplished much, so you have an F right now. So you can't really do that. What I've taken to do, honestly, is ungrading the midterm grade. And if a student has to get a midterm grade, I will pull them aside or have them schedule an appointment with me and say, okay, what grade would you give yourself in the class right now and why? And we just talk about it. And I say, okay, that's what I'm going to put on the midterm grade report. Those midterm grades are not binding. They're not even recorded anywhere. They don't show up on the transcript. They're recorded and reported back to the student, I guess. But that's a way to kind of make that fit into the system. The registrar's office does not know that I am doing this, and they have never asked about this. It's never caused any problems. So I'm thinking that's actually pretty workable. Now, to make again, not knowing the details of the situation about how exactly that works, I'm afraid I don't know if I can give like a super detailed set of suggestions, but communication is the top of the list. Just go to the people who are in charge of this and say, how would you recommend that I handle this? Because I can't just give people like a 72. It's not how it works in the class. They're doing meets expectations or so forth. So how might I turn this into a number that you will be able to use? Maybe if there's specs, and you can look at the number of specs that are covered in the class so far and how many of those have been met. And that's a percentage. We don't like doing that kind of thing in alternative grading, but if it makes the other person happy, then maybe it's worthwhile. I'm sorry, that's not a great answer, I'm afraid, but that's the best I can do right now.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm John Roundtree. I'm in communication. I did read the book. I found it very compelling. I did have a question about student motivation. So the book starts with a pretty compelling story about a student who, fails one exam, fails another exam, they can't catch back up. And I think that's a compelling case for this being used to help student motivation. But I could see the converse happening too, with students being resistant to this because revision itself could be demotivating. It's like, I just did this, now I've got to do it again, now I've got to do it again. And I've had colleagues who've encountered resistance to students who don't like change and are used to traditional grading and are used to succeeding under traditional grading. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that. How have you tried to mitigate, against student resistance? How have you tried to get students used to the idea that this is a different system?
Yeah, great question here. So I give this activity on the first day of every class that I do, and I even do it. I think I did it with you folks when I gave a keynote address back in August. And I asked my students 2 questions. What's something significant that you're good at doing? I don't often throw the word significant in there, but I don't want them to say things like procrastinating or sleeping or something like that. You can't really be good at sleeping. You can be bad at it, but you can't be good at it. Anyway, so it's like something that's like real, that can be hard at times. Okay, something that's the first thing that pops in your mind. Okay, and a lot of students will. I learn a lot of cool things about my students that way. Snowboarding or baking brownies, or I'm a cello player. And I didn't know you were a cello player. That's awesome. And then they have to share with their small groups, and that's a good way to kind of learn each other's domains. And then I ask them a follow-up question, which is, how did you get good at it? I mean, if you're that good at playing the cello, I mean, it's a hard thing to do at times. Sometimes it's fun, but sometimes it's also fun, but it's really hard work. And something about this, you persevered through this and you got good at it. How that happened? And every time I ask this question, it's the same thing. The same question with y'all when I ask this. I ask it using a polling tool, not unlike Mentimeter here, and it gathers it and makes a word cloud out of it. So the bigger the word is, the more often it was said. And always, this has never not happened, that the word practice was right there in the front. Okay, practice, perseverance, failure, struggle, consistency, all these really great things. I mean, students know perfectly well how they learn the most important things to them in their lives. And we do too. I mean, it's not through taking a test. It's not through getting things right. It's actually through kind of getting things wrong. And that sets us up to talk about feedback loops. Feedback loops being, the number one mental model for our book and also for my classes. So whenever you're learning something really significant that matters to you, it involves having a try at something with some picture in your brain about what a successful try looks like. And if it's of any value, it's probably not going to be successful the first time. In fact, if it is successful the first time, your attempt, it probably wasn't a very big deal to begin with. It's something trivial, like somebody's birthday or something. Anyway, you make that attempt, it's probably wrong. And so you get feedback, you make sense of the feedback, and you try again. And that loop just keeps on cranking until you have that picture of success in front of you. This is the way everything works except college classes. Okay. Why do we do it differently in college? I asked them, and nobody has ever had an answer for this. It's like, I really don't care what you're comfortable with. Honestly, I want to know why we do it this way. I'm comfortable laying in bed in the morning, but I still have to get out of bed in the morning. So sometimes this has to happen because we're serious about learning here. And once I phrase it to students this way, I seem to never get any questions about this. Sure. And the first part of your question a minute ago was I think a really important point. That is, revision can be demotivating. It can be demotivating if it's not properly presented. And I've had to learn this the hard way myself, that students will open up something that's just full of yellow notes on things, and they're like, there goes another 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back. And so I've had to really learn that good feedback, helpful feedback. The third pillar of the 4 pillars model is helpful feedback. Helpful feedback is it invites collaboration to solve a problem. Okay. The problem is that you made an attempt on something that's important that you're trying to learn, and it's hard, and you don't just do it. I mean, you have to do it and redo it, and you're going to learn a lot more from fixing your mistakes than you will from just sort of receiving knowledge. But do it in a way that presents this as a problem that you and the student together are going to collaboratively solve, and invite participation in it. It's like, and sometimes it's just as simple as pointing out the things that the students did well. I'm a bass guitar player and I take lessons. I've been playing for 30 years, but I still take lessons every Friday. And I go into my teacher and he's given me some exercises to do. And man, they don't always work out great. And it's really discouraging when they don't work out well until my teacher gets involved. And my teacher says, like, just breathe, relax, you're doing fine, you're a good player, but you need to move your hand a little differently, or you need to position your arm this way, and this is the sound you should be going for. And it's like, I'm not devalued as a person. I want to get better at playing my instrument, and he's inviting me to do this by participating in the feedback loop. I think that's to me the right way to frame revision. It's not just like, wow, this sucked and you got to do this over again. That's the way students are going to receive it. It's like, here's what you did right. Here's where it's kind of fallen short. Here are some things you might consider. It's like a 3-stage template for giving feedback. It doesn't have to be long, and it really works pretty well. And so, students might have had a lot of success under traditional methods. They wouldn't be in college otherwise. Sometimes those students don't have a lot of success, and that would be a thing to point out. So if you're like an A student, quote unquote A student, because you learn how to work the system well, it's like, that's great. I'm really happy that you are here and that you've had a good experience in school so far. What we're doing in this class is learning difficult things and difficult processes. Okay, the way this works, you know how it works. I don't have to explain this. In that way, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make the system of specs grading, or whatever it is I'm using, to be very natural. It may be different, but that's only because we've been fed unnatural processes for the last 12 years through high school. And so once you get back to like how you really learn, and frankly, how you're going to be evaluated in your jobs from this point forward, this is the way we kind of have to do things. If I'm really trying to prepare you for the real world as a student, I've got to look at how the real world will evaluate you. And it's not by giving you a 72 on a test. It's by engaging you in a feedback loop. And so there's any number of reasons why, that inviting students to come along on this. Giving them another thing I would say too, I don't want to drone on about this, but another thing that I'm doing this, I did this today actually, is to take a whole class meeting out just to talk about the grading system, and especially to practice with it. Like giving some theoretical students and their accomplishments. Okay, now tell me what the student's grade is going to be in the class. Yeah, let's do it again. Let's do it again. And we just kind of do this repetition of practicing with the system until it's like, oh, okay, now I kind of get it. I see that, even though there's no partial credit in the class, there's like a really robust system of revising and resubmitting. And that's my friend. Okay, that's not my enemy. That's how I get from here to there. So, stress to students that this is a very natural way of doing things. In fact, they already know how this works, and that this is aimed at your growth. It's not about grades, it's about growth. And then give them some familiarity with how it all works. And you'll still get some pushback occasionally from people, and that's to be expected. I mean, I feel like I could walk into a room and tell some people that the earth revolves around the sun, and they would push back on it somehow. So you didn't get enough faculty input on that before you made that determination. But what are you going to do about that? You just got to say, like, okay, just kill them with kindness at that point.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? I'm sold. I completely believe in this way of grading. But I always sort of think, okay, this is great, but then I'm going to send them on to the next class, and I'm in a math department, where they're going to go back to that traditional grading. And I mean, that's kind of frustrating. I mean, have you seen situations where whole departments have moved in this direction, or maybe just that one experience in my class is enough? I don't, how do you move past that?
Yeah, well, a couple of things on that. First of all, you might be surprised because I kind of thought the same way too for a while. Like, I'm doing all this stuff in my classes, but then they're going to get pulled back into a traditional system. But it turns out they weren't. It turns like the next class down the line in their physics department, for example, was a specs graded class. Like somebody had read Linda Nilsson's book, and unbeknownst to me, I remember we were at the same university. They were trying this out too. And so you never know. And the more success you have as a professor doing this, and the more you talk to each other at UHD, the less likely it is. I mean, it's still probably going to, for the foreseeable future, be overwhelmingly traditional because faculty are just like the worst about changing things. No, present company accepted, of course, that's why you're here. But you might be surprised. I mean, at sometimes, that doesn't turn out to be the case. And the second thing is there is some emerging research, longitudinal research on this. And I wish I could just pull the reference right out of my head, but I can't. I'll try to look this up. That did exactly this. They followed students from a non-traditionally graded class through their remaining classes and found that they ended up outperforming the students when they go on to a traditional graded class, they still do better than the students who are in the same class but didn't have the non-traditional class earlier. Something about it, I mean, I guess you could maybe explain it by saying they learned how to learn things. They learned how the feedback loop process really works. They're less afraid to engage in a feedback loop. They'll go to their professors for questions and so on, even if they perceive like, okay, this is going to be one of those cool classes where I get to do lots of revisions. But they'll still kind of make up their own revision process by going to the professor and saying, okay, I did this thing here. Can you give me a little bit more feedback on this? Because I want to do better next time. So, I mean, there's plenty of hope for that, I think.
Other questions people have?
We do have 4 questions left up
Oh,
on.
do you want to start? I mean, I
maybe,
did have one, I have one hand here. Let's do this one question here and then we'll move to those.
Problem.
Thanks for those comments. This is more a technical question. When you're doing ungrading or specs grading or portfolio-based grading or something else, how do you deal with the grades and how they get posted and shared with the students? Because our current LMS is really supportive of the traditional grading system and it auto-calculates everything even if you don't want it to. How do you handle that? Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, that was a super polite way of telling me that your LMS is terrible. It's okay to say the LMS is terrible. We use Blackboard Ultra and it's all of them are kind of terrible. They're not really set up for this. Some of the companies seem to be starting to get this glimpse that there are people out there who are interested in not doing traditional grading and are beginning to put things on their roadmaps. A couple of things. First, actually 3 things I can think of right off the top of my head. First of all, try not to use the LMS at all or as little as possible because it's just, like you say, it's just not set up for this. Second of all, and you might be surprised how much you can get away with not using an LMS. Second of all, I know on Blackboard, I don't know if y'all are using, Canvas or something like that, but I think they all kind of have similar features. On Blackboard, there is a feature called a schema. And what it is, it's a way of providing rules to the system for mapping points onto arbitrary text labels. So you can have Blackboard, you have to enter in numbers, but you can make it display whatever you want. And that's perfect. So I have it set up in my classes where the only 2 marks that students ever get on work is either success or retry. It's like a 2-level rubric, success or retry. And so I just have it set up so if I enter in a 1, it shows up success. And if I enter in a 0, it shows up retry. And so it makes it really easy when you do it that way. And thirdly, I provide students with a checklist that's basically the syllabus policy put into a checklist format. And I handed it out today, in fact. I can even show you, this is going to be super small, but I can actually even show you what it looks like, I think, if I can get a handle on it. It looks kind of like this. Okay, and this might be showing up backward. I'm not totally sure. Oh, I just gave myself a thumbs down. That's awesome, or somebody did. And so when students complete their tasks in the class, they just start at the bottom and start checking off boxes. And they just check off boxes until the semester's over. And once they've checked off a box that's in a particular row for a grade, then that's the grade they've earned so far. So this is like dead simple to do. It's just a piece of paper. It's not anything technological, so anybody can use it. There's no barriers to access or anything like that. And so that actually makes it really, really simple to track the grades and keep the books. LMSs just have a long way to go on lots and lots of different things. That's a whole nother AMA. But that's kind of how I've been handling it. We've had some posts on the blog, the gradingforgrowth.com blog, in the recent past that'll have to do with Canvas too. So if you go to gradingforgrowth.com, my blog that I write with David Clark, and do a search on Canvas, I think that somebody wrote a Canvas article like last year that describes how they do it. So I'm going to go over to the Mentimeter and see what's happening over there. Let me do a screen share and get this up on so everyone can see. Yes, I'm with that one. Okay, so here are the questions. Okay, how do you incorporate revision and reassessment with non-traditional students who work 30 hours a week? Most of my students barely have enough time to do assignments one time. Good question, because David's very fond of pointing out that, you know, the reassessment that you do, revision and reassessment, has to be considered as part of the normal workload for your class. So when you're planning your class out, this is maybe a corollary to keep it simple. Keep the revision and reassessment as simple and as humanly possible, and don't overburden students, because this is like, treat it like another assignment. The way that I incorporate it is that a lot of it's done in class, so there's no outside time that's taken. The things that are not done in class have no deadlines, and so they just kind of get to them when they get to them. I think it's fair also to say that, you know, when you take a college class, there is a certain amount of time that's required to do this class. And, you know, I stick to the usual 2 hours outside of class for every hour inside of class exchange rate. And that seems to be pretty reasonable for most people. It's on me to make sure that the revision process that I set up fits in that time frame. Like, I don't give homework in the classes. We do most of our homework. It's a flip class, so we're doing the homework part in class. We're doing most assessments in class. And anything that's done outside of class, that's where the extra, quote, extra time is coming from. And I've never had a complaint from a non-traditional student about the workload in the class, because I try to be really mindful of kind of where, make sure it's like, again, it's an assignment. Even though it's a revision of an assignment. So you have to make it fit. And it really, again, it really helps to, at the front end, when you're designing the class, just take as much out. It's like playing Jenga. How many blocks can you pull off of that tower before it collapses? That's the game I try to play with my classes. And it's amazing what you can take out of a class that you didn't think you could take out of a class. Okay, I won't go into any detail on that. Another question: in the courses, you limit the revisions per week. Do you set how quickly revisions can be submitted? No, I don't. They can submit, that becomes too much work for everybody involved. I don't really like doing a lot of work. So I just say it's what we call them challenge problems that there's difficult problems. Sometimes they're proofs, sometimes they're coding assignments. And the rule is you can submit. This semester, I'm experimenting with 3 instead of 2 and see how that goes. You can submit up to 3 items per week. That can be 3 new submissions. That can be a new submission and 2 revisions, or 2 revisions and a submission, or 3 revisions of an earlier submission. I don't really care. I don't keep track of it at all. So I discourage the turning right back around and handing things in, because a lot of times you want to sit with these things, and that might be a little too fast. But if a student puts in a revision Saturday night and wants to be able to resubmit Sunday, more power to them, as long as they haven't gone over their 3 per week. Another question, comment: just finished the book, not ready for all grading this semester. Thank you for realizing that. Please don't start this until you feel like you're really, you know, like fully ready to do this. But I did put elements of standards-based grading in my classes. This is something I really want to make sure that I mention this. First of all, thanks for the shout out there. If you don't have to do it all, okay, you don't have to do an entire full-on ungrading implementation in your class to help your students. There is unfortunately a thread of conversation amongst some alt grading people that sounds like this: I use standards-based grading exclusively in my classes because I really care about my students. which is like by implication, if you don't do this, then you don't really care about your students. And that's just not true. I mean, if all you can afford to do right now is like maybe do what this person said and just write out your learning outcomes really clearly, phrases, action verbs. That's a massive win. That's the first pillar of the 4 pillars, the clear content standards. If that's all you can do, that's awesome. And your students are going to really benefit from that. And that's a great place to, if you choose to do more later on or can do more later on, that's a great starting point. If all you can do this semester right now is like pick one assessment and experiment with allowing revisions without penalty on it and just see how it goes. That's great. You know, and students are going to really benefit from this and you'll learn a lot. And so please realize if you can just pick one of the 4 pillars and do one thing with it, that's a massive step forward for everybody, not only you and your students. So I really appreciate that comment. Last one here, we're urged to create early alerts for students who are not performing well in the course. How do you envision this in this paradigm? Honestly, doing early alerts for students, I guess it would depend on like how early are we talking about, like 3 weeks in? 3 weeks in, you don't really have a lot of evidence of learning accumulated yet. So it's really just a judgment call on your part. And I would say it's okay to lean into the idea that as an instructor, your job is to make professional judgment calls about student performance. That's what all grading is professional judgment calls based on your expertise and experience on student performance. Now you want to make this evidence-based, but you got to work with what you got. And if I have a student, for example, who has missed 2 weeks of class, they're getting an early alert. Okay? I'm not going to wait for some syllabus construct to tell me this. I'm just going to say, look, you need to show up for class. You're not engaged with the class. That's an alert. And, somebody's going to know about this. Your particular system, just kind of, work within that system. But, I think a lot of this comes down to sometimes you just got to make a judgment call, and the paradigm is there to support your judgment calls. But you still have to make the call anyway. So you have to work with what you got, unfortunately. That is it so far from the Mentimeter land.
Can I follow up?
Anybody,
Can I have a
get
question
it?
for a follow-up? So when
Sure,
the question about the resubmissions and the number of resubmissions, let's combine some of the questions together. So our students work, they do a lot of the work on the weekends for our courses. So how do you factor in time to do this feedback loop? If they are doing the work for example, in that example, they said they want to do something Saturday with the idea that I'm going to submit it and then resubmit it on Sunday, and those are going to be my 2. Are you spending your weekends grading? I mean, how do we create that expectation? Are you saying you're not doing submissions on the weekend, business hours? Do you have a 24-hour turnaround? What's kind of your policy there?
Yeah, let me be really clear. I do not work on the weekends, and I do not work in the evenings, and I do not work on holidays because I'm a human being and I need the rest, and I like to have fun and sleep and hang out with my kids. And so I'm totally not grading on the weekends. And I would just tell a student, if a student approached me and says, I'm going to submit something on Saturday and I want you to grade it in time for me to submit it on Sunday, I'd be like, there's no way I'm doing that. Okay. What you need to do is maybe start a little earlier on this, like the previous Saturday, or I can get to it during the week and then you can work on it again the following weekend. But I mean, students have got to realize that we've got limitations too. I mean, I state this clearly in my syllabus. Like I don't do work on the weekends unless it's like, the very end of the semester, you just can't really avoid it. And so you get 3 submissions per week. How you set those up is up to you, but you just got to realize that I do not answer emails on the weekends. I do not answer emails after 6 p.m. And so if you want to get in touch with me, I might I don't know why I would do this, but I might want to grade on the weekend at some point, but you can't count on it. So what you got to do is manage your own time to help yourself. And I can't do that for anybody. And this is just part of college. I mean, part of college is learning how to manage your time successfully, manage time, attention, tasks, and projects. And, I'll help you with the management process, but I'm not going to step up my game and sit down at the computer like, I want to submit this at 6 and then have a revision by 7 so I can resubmit it by 8. That's not going to work. What is going to work is just like knowing that none of these problems that you're submitting have hard deadlines on them. Okay, you just turn them in when you can get to them, but it's on you, the student, to know yourself and to know your situation. And if you get to a point where like your situation is just so convoluted that the normal flow of time just doesn't work for you, then we need to sit down and talk about how you're going to make it in the class. And I really mean that. I want to help the student. Helping does not necessarily mean being on call 24/7. In fact, that's unhelpful to the student, I would say. I could really go off on that, as you can probably tell. I basically leave it up to the student to say, like, I don't know your situation. It's not really any of my business what your situation is, unless you need help from me to manage it. But I'm going to give you some structure and some freedom within that structure, and you look at your schedule of whatever, and you figure out what's going to make it work for yourself.
Hi, I've got a question. So I'm getting my head around some of this for an upper division class. This seems to be much, much easier. But for some of the lower division classes, we have things like ACS accreditation, which says at the end of the test, or at the end of the semester, thou shalt administer a 70-question, 110-minute timed multiple choice test. How do you work that in? Especially if the students think, well, we haven't been working timed multiple choice questions the entire semester.
Yeah, it's funny because I sometimes will get questions like yours that say, like, this seems like it works really, really well in an upper level class, but I'm not really sure how it would work well in one of these classes. And sometimes I get questions that say, like, this seems like it would work really well in these kinds of classes, but I'm not really sure how it's going to work in an upper division class. It's like, it does actually work in all different places. So first of all, there's not really any evidence that suggests that working primarily in an untimed setting puts students at a disadvantage in a timed setting. In fact, there's some research evidence that says there is no connection between those things. Like if you learn how to perform in an outside of a strictly time parameterized environment, you'll be fine when you go into that 70-minute multiple choice item. Secondly, you can make, if that's part of the class, like a certification process, like a lot of upper division classes like this too, and lower division classes too, if that time test is part of what you want students to be able to perform on, that can be part of your class. I mean, you can do little mini versions of this and say, I'm going to give you 30 questions that are similar to this, and today what you're going to do is complete these 30 questions in a 50-minute setting. And this is, if you can do that successfully, then you get some sort of some sort of reward, or some sort of part of your grade is based on your ability to do this. And if you can't do it, then we'll come back, we'll do it again next week. And whatever it is you want the outcome to be, you can make that part of an alternatively graded course. Okay, the only limit is the creativity of the instructor. I'm trying to think of, there are some examples in our book where this was actually the case, what's the ACS accredited chemistry course is one of the case studies in our book. And I think this actually came up that this is one of the things they have to do, is they have to satisfy these accreditation requirements. And this person made it work for them, and without sort of sacrificing the vision they had for how assessment worked. Whatever learning outcome you feel like is what you want, you can make little pieces of that or the entire thing of that to be part of the assessment structure of your course. And there just doesn't appear to be any limitation on like class size, class level, whether it's a multi-section lab class or any of this stuff where this says, yeah, this alternative grading stuff just isn't going to work here. Nothing, I keep thinking that there will be, but then somebody comes along and proves me wrong. So I did want to mention one thing on that note. This is a slide, so I'm going to just throw this out here really quickly here. I know we're getting close. Y'all have been at it literally all day long. I don't want to hold you off too much longer, but this is a slide here. Hang on, I got stuff all over my screen. A lot of folks ask me, like, how would this work in a blank class? And I would just really point you to our book. This is in the heart of the book, the Grading for Growth book, is these 17 case studies that David orchestrated as part of his sabbatical project, actually. As you can see, we've got them here in an index, and it's like all different kinds of institutions, all different modalities. You see some online synchronous, online asynchronous, class sizes, subject areas, you name it. The other question that was submitted in advance, that someone mentioned the AI question, was how do I make this work when I have, what is it? It's a content-focused course, large sections, 4:3 teaching load, and no TAs. That's almost me, actually, because I teach mostly content-focused courses. I don't have large sections, but I have a 3:3 teaching load and no TAs. And I can share with you my materials, and I've been sharing with you how we make this work. And if you're looking for other situations, like Gretchen Bender teaches a history of art and architecture class. It's 200 students. It's face-to-face, and she does a brilliant job of it. Jennifer Momsen teaching 135 student biology classes that are coordinated lab sections too. So there's that added complexity of making us all work together. Our book really goes into a lot of detail about how these ordinary awesome professors are just making it work for them, working with what they have and making this work out. There were even more case studies that we didn't include in the book. We have enough case studies to write a second book. We had to leave some on the cutting room floor because they were too similar. We tried to not have all STEM classes, for instance, but it's our bubble.
We have one more question, or did you have, okay, can we take two more questions and then we will,
Sure can.
okay, all right, go ahead.
I'm more concerned about y'all.
Oh, I think we're at about, yeah, two more questions is probably our limit too.
Robert, so I actually sent in the question you just talked about, and I read the book, and I specifically, the question was about like classes like Intro to Psychology, where it is completely content-based, and how to incorporate this type of assessment or paradigm into those large 100% content-based type courses. And I read the book and I see how it works in a lot of math classes and some science classes and application-based classes, but really and truly those intro kind of content courses, how have you seen it worked before?
Well, a lot of what I personally have seen, which may not show up in our book, is distilled in this chapter. It's chapter 11 or 13. It's a long sort of workbook style chapter, and the intent of that chapter is to sit down with a course you're interested in and design a prototype of a grading system from scratch. And one of the questions that we ask early on, and like just things to think about as you're building this, is your course primarily sort of like facts and content? Is it primarily, like processes and concepts, or is it kind of an even mix of both? And the answer to that question tends to drive toward different specific models, okay? In our experience and our opinions, I guess, David and I both believe that heavily conceptual, process-oriented courses, like a lot of upper division classes, work really well with ungrading, where there's no marks on things and it's just all feedback and collaborative working on the grades. Whereas content-focused courses, I'm thinking like for me, that would be like calculus. There's a lot of conceptual stuff in calculus, but it's mostly content. And I was a psych major as an undergrad, so I know kind of what that's all about too. Content-focused courses work particularly well with specifications grading, okay, where you can set up or standards-based grading, where you can say for all this, for different kind of major content areas, perhaps you can look at that sociology course and start to section it off and say like, okay, I can identify like 15 major areas of content in the class, or 10 major areas of content in the class. And for each of those major areas, maybe you want to have an assessment or a collection of assessments that allow students to demonstrate knowledge on that content, okay? And by demonstrating knowledge successfully, maybe twice, maybe you want to do, so they do 2 demonstrations of success on a block of content. They have mastered that content, and your grade is based on how many blocks of content you master. That's one way to approach it. I mean, that's sort of like the Lyndon Nilsson specs grading bundles approach to doing this. It kind of just goes back to simple course design. I mean, backwards course design. What kind of, what do you want students to have learned throughout the course? And then work backwards and say, okay, well, what opportunities am I going to set up for students to demonstrate that they have learned this content in the course. What's a successful demonstration, and how much content should they demonstrate on to get a C? How much should they demonstrate on to get a B? How much should they do to get an A? And then, it's really just a matter of structuring the content. It totally works all right in a content-oriented class. I don't have any psychology classes on this list of case studies, unfortunately, but I know that there are people out there that are using this in things like sociology and psychology for that very reason. And they're also finding that there's some conceptual stuff in the mix too that's very, very interesting that students may. That the traditional way of envisioning that class is it's content focused, but actually there's quite a bit of meta skills that are involved in that as well, as you probably well know, that maybe that's part of the course too, is demonstrating some meta skills. So yeah, it's very doable. The good news is, and it really comes to a matter of just simple sort of engineering the course to make that pop out.
Hi, Robert. Okay, I will risk a potentially dumb question, but if I fail, you can give me feedback and I'll revise it.
I'll tell you it's dumb.
Um,
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
So, a lot of the examples in the book treat these learning objectives or assignment objectives as discrete to specific assignments. So it's like you have one assignment for one objective. And a lot of my assignments, I think about like, there's 5 different learning objectives in this paper. When you do that, do you say, okay, here's a checklist for the paper, and you need to go back and just this one check piece you need to fix? How do you think about that? Does that question make sense?
Can you give me an example of what you're describing here? I'm afraid I'm the dumb one here. I'm not tracking with it 100%. I want to make sure I give you a good answer.
Yeah, I could see like you mark the assignment as needs revision, right? And that assignment matches with one objective, one standard, for example. And so it's clear that that's the assignment status, is that the status is needs revision. But what if you have an assignment that deals with multiple objectives? When you do this, do you say that the entire assignment needs revision? Do you parse it out for the students? And does that just start to look like a rubric?
So I have again, this is specific to my classes. This may not be a perfect fit for other people, but I have a document that I give the students out with the syllabus called Standards for Student Work. And it's got everything that looks like, this is like the full picture of success for every kind of assignment in the class, and including the ones that do repeated revisions. And, it's hard to pull apart, what exactly, like you can't say like a checkbox, well, this part, you're okay in this area, but in this category it needs revision, because if you're writing a mathematical proof, for example, it's hard to, for example, to separate out mathematical correctness from clarity of exposition, because those two things are not independent variables. I mean, they affect each other, and a clarity of exposition can lead to math errors and vice versa. So I have like just a whole list of this is what a successful challenge problem solution looks like. Okay, and basically it boils down to, if there's an answer involved, the answer is correct, and the explanation is clear, correct, and convincing, and free from significant mistakes. And there are different ways to make mistakes in math too, and I explain what that is. And I try to keep it kind of amorphous in that way, to say like, and importantly too, I give students examples of successful attempts and unsuccessful attempts at the beginning of the semester, to say like, here are some exemplars of what I mean. Like here's a solution that is successful. Here's a solution that is nearly successful, but not quite, and here's why. Here's a solution that's just completely off the rails and you just need to start over again. And let students just chew on that, okay? And then to me, that's better than trying to discretize everything. And when a student finally does turn in a solution and it needs revision, I'll point out the things that need revision as much as I can, at least the major things, and say, okay, you need to revise this. Here's where it fell short. You might want to think about these questions here. And sometimes when students do that, they fix one thing, and because that's now clear, there are other things there that are now issues that I didn't see before, because this other thing was a bigger issue. It's like a cloud obscuring a cloud. No, the first cloud is gone. Now I've got this other thing to deal with. So we just realized we try to get as clear of a picture as possible of what success looks like, and then deal with falling short of that as real submissions get turned in. It's a very human, messy process, and it's very hard to sort of like program it as it were into a rubric, which is rubrics are okay, but the problem is it's exactly this thing you're pointing out, is that they tend to discretize things that are very continuous in nature. So I mean that's kind of how I do it. I tell students there's not really any sort of like pre-flight checklist that I can give you for this, other than, you know, is it clear? Is it correct? Is it convincing? If you ran this past a classmate, this is like the ultimate litmus test I tell students to do. If you ran your solution past a classmate who really wanted to know the solution, and they had all the background math knowledge that you have, but were completely new to your problem, would they be able to follow what you do from the beginning all the way to the end and agree with you without having to go do any more work themselves? That's a high standard. That's what we're shooting for. And if you can't answer that question honestly, yes, then that's not clear enough yet, or it's not complete enough yet. And you got to keep working on it until you turn it in. And that's probably what the feedback's going to say, you know, once it comes back if you don't do this. So, I mean, it's a human process. We got to work human to human with it, I'm afraid. I wish it were otherwise. Otherwise, I just use ChatGPT to do my grading for me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Robert, for meeting with us today. Let's give him a round of applause. And thank you, faculty, for hanging in there. It's been a long day. Luckily, we have a holiday on Monday, so. Okay. Thank you. And do you have anything else you want to share, or anything that you, good? We're ready to sign off?
I just want to say thanks again, Judith, to you and your team for setting this up, and to all of you in the room there. I see you there. I'm really grateful for your engagement with this topic. It's people like you that are going to really change higher ed into a better version of itself, which is something that's badly needed, especially in this day and age. So keep plugging away at it, and just invite further communication and collaboration. You can email me anytime you want. Again, I highly encourage you to sign up for that Perusall event, perusall.com/engage. $15 gets a lot of mileage, I think, in a 4-week slow reading program with 100 other people. That's a pretty cool opportunity. So if you want to go even deeper, maybe if you have a question about your particular subject or class, you probably will find somebody in that group that is doing exactly what you're asking about. So again, I highly encourage you to jump in on that. And I hope you have a great semester. I'm hopeful for good things for all of us this semester. I'll put it that way.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you. Bye.